Friends, welcome to the Gospel Today podcast. I'm Caleb Suko, coming to you from Odessa, Ukraine. And today I have a guest with me, Melek Steele. And we're going to talk about Jehovah's Witnesses or Watchtower Society. I don't know, what's the proper way to refer to them?
Yeah, the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society, now formerly known as the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Usually they just say like JW, right?
JW.org,
I think everyone knows them by JW, right? So I've been going through a series of videos talking about how to share the gospel with people from different backgrounds. And I thought it'd be great to have you share a little bit of your experience coming out of the JWs, a little bit about that, and also maybe some tips or ideas about how to share the gospel to JWs. So let's just start with, give us some of your history of growing up, being in the Watchtower Society. What was that like to start off with, and what was your experience there?
Well, I was raised a third generation witness, as the shorthand term. My grandmother came to the witness faith after being raised Roman Catholic, so she brought that same religiosity to the religion. My mother was as well, and then I, like I said, was third generation. I stayed a witness until I was about 24 years old, so I made it through the majority of my life to date as a witness. I was on track to become one of the leaders in the organization. The way it's set up is very hierarchical. There is a structure in the congregation where there are ministerial servants, which some would call deacons, and then elders, which also translates to my faith now. But the way that organization is set up, there also is something that young men do, primarily young men. Young people are invited and encouraged to go on a mission trip, but primarily young men are invited to do, which is engage in a mission trip or a service at the headquarters of Jehovah's Witnesses. And these are headquarters established all over the world. They're called Bethels. And the headquarters of all of the Bethels is in New York, Washington. And that's where I served for 2 years, starting at 19. And leaving that organization is actually quite a long story, but essentially it boils down to a confusion on what the truth was, because it does not teach the truth. Their Bible is changed, and when you read it in depth and you start to reason and gather your own beliefs, especially as you're progressing towards a leadership role, I started to notice some inconsistencies, which I think really any honest-hearted person would notice. But it is something that's very hard to reconcile if it's something you've attached your identity to or your life to.
So you were basically on a path to leadership within the Witness Society, right?
Yes.
And so what is that like? Maybe explain a little bit more. Like, what does that path look like? Where do you start and where do you end up? What do you have to go through to get there?
Yeah, it's quite complicated. But if you are a young man, they make it easy, and they break it up into steps. And so for me, it started with my Bethel service, and it actually started way before that. I was on the Theocratic Ministry School, which is their designed program to help you knock on doors and proselytize, evangelize. I started that when I was 8 years old, roughly. And that just involves reading before the congregation, practicing interacting with your neighbors, practicing knocking on doors, what you will say. And then you go to Bethel and you're surrounded by other people who are steeped in the organization. And so you're learning about the organization's history and how to share it with those who do not know the organization. When I left Bethel, I was assigned to a congregation in rural Colorado, where basically the whole point of my being there was to help the elderly population to shore up that congregation. And so I inherited a lot of roles that the older elders and older deacons had formerly had. And so that involved giving sermons week to week, managing the schedules for those who would travel to the different congregations, a lot of building and construction work because everything happens in-house in that organization. So all of the New Kingdom halls, which is what they call church buildings, all of those things happen within the organization. So they source all of the labor and the work from within Jehovah's Witness believers. And so for me in Colorado, and being so young in that congregation, a lot of responsibility was thrust onto me. And this involved even shepherding within the congregation, dealing with different issues that congregants would have.
How old were you at this time?
This was between 21 and 24.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And so, yeah, I left Bethel after 2 years. I was 21. And being in Colorado, I started in Loveland and then was moved to Fort Collins, but all rural. So these congregations are very, very old in population. The demographic is very old, I should say.
So was this like, were you like career already Jehovah's Witness, or
Yes.
is this all volunteer stuff?
Everything's wrapped up into it.
Yeah.
My job was through the witnesses. When I was at Bethel, I met somebody who owned a company out there. And so I did work a secular job to support myself. But the majority of my time outside of work was with the witnesses, yes.
So I think a lot of people, they know Jehovah's Witnesses are the people who come and knock on their door, right?
Yes.
Why do they use that technique so much? I mean, it's just interesting to me. Like, I see them here in Ukraine. Of course, we have a lot of Jehovah's Witnesses here as well. And they will, I think, knock on doors here as well. But also they'll stand outside with like a little stand with some books on, offering a free Bible study. Do they have any other methods than that? Or is that just, that's it? That's those two things?
Well, there are a lot. That's the primary way in countries where you have freedom of speech and freedom of religion. It is to knock on doors and to stand in public places. In other places, they'll be more discreet. They'll write letters. They actually have entire schools designed to train witnesses to go into places that are more discreet. But the primary reason that they engage in that form of witnessing, to use that term, is Matthew 28, 18 and 19, the Great Commission, which all Christians know it as. And they refer to that commission as going therefore, and it is our urgency, or their urgency, I should say, to share the gospel with others in a very active manner, and that would help bring about the day of Christ.
Okay. So regarding that too.
Yes.
So I'm assuming you probably knocked on a few doors in your witness days, right?
Thousands.
Okay, thousands.
Thousands.
Like, if you knock on a door, obviously, I would guess the majority would say, I'm not interested.
Yes.
Okay, and then every once in a while you get ones like willing to engage, right?
Yes.
And then did you get people that actually ended up becoming JWs?
Yes.
Because really, okay.
Yeah.
And just this is just my, I guess, curiosity. But those people that actually became JWs, were any of them from an unchristian background? Like, they didn't go to church going, like they were agnostic or atheist, or were any of them from that kind of background?
The ones that I helped proselytize or share the witness faith with were primarily younger. Okay. So they matched whatever age group I was at, and most of them had been exposed to some form of Christianity previously, but didn't have strong parents. Okay. And so there wasn't a good basis of knowledge there. And when the witnesses meet anybody who is interested, one of their tactics is to swarm with enthusiasm and friendliness. Okay. And so if you can get somebody to come to the Kingdom Hall, you'll notice that they kind of congregate around. They'll start offering to do things. And so I noticed a pattern in the demographic that I was helping to understand the witness faith. It was younger, typically already isolated from social groups outside of church, and in some sort of financial need.
Yeah, I guess I was asking that because it seemed to me that groups like Jehovah's Witnesses, I think Mormons as well, they tend to do best work with people who have some, at least a little bit of background, like growing up in the church or something like that, but weak, like you said. Because, then they kind of build on that and go in their own direction with it, obviously. Okay, so that was early 20s, right? Where you were really heavily involved. And what was the first signs to you that were like, maybe I have some questions here, or maybe this isn't all that I thought it was?
Well, at 23, I was recommended to become or be appointed as an elder. And the way the hierarchy is set up, you have a traveling overseer who makes his rounds about twice a year. And so he made his first round that year and said I might be a little too young, but to engage with the population in my congregation, to do more outreach, to start training with other elders. And so what happened was I ended up going on shepherding calls, is what they called them. So you sit with families who are weak in the congregation or going through some sort of struggle. And at that point, because I was not an elder, I didn't say much. My primary role was just to listen, to see how those...
Observe and try and learn.
See how those circumstances are handled.
Yeah.
And I noticed that there were a lot more cracks behind the very pretty paint that's put up in the witness organization. I realized how much turmoil was happening in the congregation that as a young man I perhaps wasn't exposed to. One of the other things, as a good friend of mine actually was subjected to some abuse from the organization or from somebody within the organization. And after seeing how that was handled and doing a little bit more research and seeing how prolific that issue was, like that, it's not something that's uncommon in the organization. In fact, if you do your research, there is a number of cases that countries have brought against the organization involving abuse. That sort of shook me to my core, because this is something that I grew up thinking was a perfect organization. And so experiencing that caused me to ask a few questions.
That's interesting. So it wasn't necessarily a theological truth or something that they were teaching that you were like, well, I don't agree with that, or that seems strange to me. It was more of, you got into the kind of nitty gritty of the church life, and you saw things that were at, kind of a dissonance to what they presented themselves as, right?
Yeah, that was the first pull away. Yes.
Because one other thing I think that probably most people notice about Jehovah's Witnesses is they're always well dressed. And is that something that comes from their scriptures? Is that just something that the Watchtower Society, promotes heavily? Where does that come from?
It stems from Matthew 6. You are the salt of the earth. Let your light shine. Do not put the lamp under a basket. If we are in the world, or if they are in the world, even my terminology still sometimes, you'll see I slip back into that. But if they are in the world, the objective is to witness at all times. And so to always be ready to defend your faith, you have to be different than the world in some way. And so you'll notice in whatever setting they're in, culturally, they will try to be on the better side of the spectrum when it comes to dress and presentation, especially grooming as well. It's something that they strongly emphasize because they want people to notice and perhaps ask questions about why this group of people seems to be different.
That's very interesting. Okay, so the first thing you noticed was this dissonance that you saw within the culture and everything. And then where did you go from there? Like what led you to kind of investigate further, or led you further away from Watchtower Society?
It's a long story, but to make it brief, when you believe something to be the only way your entire life, and you watch somebody give their life for these beliefs. My grandmother passed essentially over the blood issue. They do not accept blood. And you watch somebody go to the end of their life with such firm and devout faith. You feel like if this isn't the truth, then there must not be a truth. And so, like you said, there wasn't a theological issue at first, but as I decided to set up my life and how I was going to live the rest of my life, of course, apart from the witnesses, because I could not agree with what was happening legally, I started to investigate other religions. And that led me eventually back to Christ and studying theology, but getting an accurate knowledge. I had to change the translation of the Bible that I read, and that's when I was really able to.
Which, by the way, we have a copy right here. This is, and honestly, I don't know where I got it from, but this is the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, which was supposedly translated by Charles Taze Russell, right? I think.
It's a complicated story, and I actually, if you're going to witness to witnesses, if you're going to try to share the accurate gospel with somebody who believes what they profess, I would question their translation. Ask them to look up who translated their copy of the Bible.
Well, and that's what I was going to ask you too, because I think that sometimes when we get into gospel discussion with Jehovah's Witnesses and we share a scripture, they'll say, well, your translation is not really accurate or something like that. And so, and I've heard some people say, well, you can use the New World Translation actually to present the gospel.
Yes.
Are you aware of any of those techniques, or would you suggest doing that, or what would your approach be? as far as scriptures go when you're in.
Yeah, if you're going to share scriptures with somebody, you need to know which scriptures are different. Some of the scriptures that I find key to highlight: Colossians 1:15 and 16, John 1:1.
And that's in the New World Translation?
These are in the New World Translation. These are scriptures that they have changed, that they will note are different from your translation. And then you could go down the route of why is that. And then I like to say it's blasphemous to change any intent. And so if you go to their version of the Greek interlinear, you'll notice that the changes that are in the New World Translation are not in the Greek interlinear.
Oh, really?
That is also produced by them. And so it changes the meaning, and you can show them that in their copies. And that has been a successful tactic.
Because I was not aware that they have that interlineary translation. Yeah. So if you're not familiar, I'll just read. This is, by the way, from the New World Translation, right? So don't get mistaken. John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word, and actually it's capitalized there. And the Word was with God, and the Word was a God, lowercase.
Yes.
So that's definitely far different than what we have in our translations that I think are accurate, right? I was going to mention, I mentioned this to you before when we were talking, that one verse that I have used with them, and I haven't read it in a long time, but let's see. It says, verse 3, all things came into existence through him, and apart from him, not even one thing came into existence. And I actually use that verse with them because if you're speaking about the Word, and all things came into existence, they would say that Christ came into existence at one point in time, right?
Yes.
So I said, but that means that he would be excluded from verse 3, right?
Yes.
But it very clearly says, even in their translation, that all things came into existence through him.
Logically, it does not make sense. And if you're going to share the gospel with somebody who has invested their life in this organization, I do think it is best to start with logic. One of the things that Jehovah's Witnesses pride themselves on is their ability to reason. They even have a book entitled Reasoning from the Scriptures. And so if you can share something like that from their copy of the Bible, even Hebrews 1 is another great chapter that I like to use, because the most important thing, I think, for them to understand is the deity of Christ. And that's what separates them from salvation, the salvation that they think they have. And that is a very scary tactic that's used in other cults as well, is to de-deify Christ, to take away his godliness. And so if you can show them how the logic just does not add up, even from their own copy, you may be able to share the gospel.
Yeah. So now you kind of became disenchanted with the Watchtower Society.
Yes.
And that led you to leaving the Watchtower Society. And was that kind of like a quick process, or what are we talking about? A year, 2 years, or a month, or a week? How long did that take?
It's over the course of a few years that I actually had to stop and reevaluate every single belief, because this copy of the Bible only changes a few scriptures. They are key scriptures, but it's only a few. You have to go through every single doctrine with a fine-tooth comb to understand, do I actually believe? And so I had my copy for a long time with a copy of the NASB, the translation that I decided to go with to get an accurate knowledge of God. And I had to go through each individual chapter and see what is different, what is not, what is true, what is not, and understand why some things were morphed, and how it would fit the witness doctrine versus how it fits into Christianity.
And once you did leave the Watchtower Society, you didn't immediately come to an understanding of the gospel, did you?
No.
There was also kind of a time in between there. So what led you to that, where you finally understood with clarity the gospel of Jesus Christ?
It started with college. So with a background in knocking on doors, caring for my neighbors, I had all of this energy that I wanted to give to something. And so I decided to pursue nursing. Nursing has been a great ministry for me. But I didn't know how to identify spiritually, and it left a huge hole because I could not even sit in a kingdom hall without feeling an intense measure of guilt and rage even at the things that were happening. But I didn't have anywhere to take the spiritual energy. And so I studied a few different religions in college. First, I took the philosophy of death and dying class, and then I took a deep study of religions class. And in those classes, I studied Eastern religion. I identified with Buddhism for a while. Buddhism gave me a sort of peace. It gave me a practice, something to aim for, but it also didn't offer salvation. It felt like I was on a treadmill, and with my sort of personality, I want to do everything to the nth degree. And I considered like monastery, like, do I want to be a monk? Is this how far you go with this belief? And even the idea there that you never really get to their end goal.
Yeah, I mean, Buddhism doesn't really offer you anything. It sort of like offers you nothing.
Yes.
It's like just detached from everything,
Yes, everything.
have nothing, and then there's just nothing.
Yeah. It's not a merciful religion. And I kept remembering what the Bible taught as far as Jesus' words, the Sermon on the Mount, a big of big importance in my life, even as a young man, how to live life, standards, guidelines. And I told myself, even if the Bible isn't true, because at this point I was still under the mindset of the witnesses may be the most right of all.
Okay.
At this point, I can live by the Bible standards, but I just can't believe all the way. But then after studying with that fine-tooth comb and reading the NASB, slowly over time I started to see, hey, this organization has got it wrong.
Right.
This is a problem with man. My anger needs to be directed at man and not at God. And that sort of humble break in me allowed me to read the Bible with a more open heart.
That's amazing. I think you mentioned just in that last sentence there, you said this organization. And it seems to me that studying some of the false religions and cults and things, one of the common things in them is that they are very much organizational focused. And putting the organization, up, and that is really becomes in a way their god or their idol is the organization itself. I think sometimes even within Christianity, there's a tendency to do that with, let's say, maybe certain mega churches or movements or things like that. And I do think that that's one of the great defining differences of the gospel, that the gospel never promotes just one organization. I mean, of course, we can say the Church of Jesus Christ, right? The Catholic Church, the global church, right? But it's not an organization in that sense. And so the defining nature of the gospel is that it is putting Christ up above all organizations.
Which the witnesses, they completely take Christ and they put him on a lower level, and they almost put the organization above Christ.
I wouldn't say almost. I would say they do. They really do.
It's when I was getting baptized as a witness, and one of the things that led me to believe that I should re-baptize when I came to an accurate knowledge and was truly saved, was the realization that the phrasing of their baptism is God's Spirit-led organization. The emphasis on that organization there, and not in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Spirit.
So if I were to ask a Jehovah's Witness, what is the gospel? What would they say to me? And what do they actually believe the gospel is?
They believe that the gospel is the good news that Christ, the man, came and gave a sacrifice to redeem mankind for Adam's first sin.
So what do they mean by redeem?
They take it as Adam's sin put all of mankind in a rejected space in God's mind, or from God's point of view. And Christ needed to be made nothing more, nothing less than what Adam was, a man, and that he had no deity, that he was essentially created, was an angel. They view him as in his pre-earthly existence as Michael, the archangel, and that he came as a man and only a man, and died and then redeemed mankind through his sacrifice.
So is that like effectual for all mankind, or how does that work?
It works for those who express faith in
Okay.
Christ, the man, and those who have heard and get baptized as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. So it's still exclusive, very, very exclusive.
Okay. So when we talk about the gospel, what would you see as the main factor, or maybe two or three defining factors that differentiate the true gospel from what Jehovah's Witnesses are teaching?
The biggest thing for me is Christ's deity. It boils down to who Christ is, what he did, and then, of course, how God is working out his purposes even today, and the fact that the church is the body and not the organization.
Right.
Christ is God, and if Christ is God, then we have to exercise faith that he came as God.
Yeah, that's a completely changes the whole nature when we talk about redemption.
Yes.
I mean, 'cause it's so strange to even think about it. If Christ was just an ordinary man and he did not have deity, how is his death different from any other man that says, "Hey, I want to go and die for whoever," you know? So let's talk a little bit then about if you have an opportunity, maybe somebody has Jehovah's Witness friend, neighbor, family member. And I guess I'm thinking more in that sense than if somebody comes and knocks on the door, just because it seems like when they knock on the door, they're kind of already set. They're either going to tell you what they want to tell you, or they're going to be gone. But maybe God can use that too, I think. But let's talk more in that context. Friend, family member, neighbor, that's Jehovah's Witness. What approach would you take of, I really want this person to understand the true gospel?
I would first start from a humble point of view. The Holy Spirit is the one that can mold hearts, that can reach hearts. When you're engaging with somebody who has invested a life into this organization and has no doubt given up or limited a lot of relationships for this organization, it's very hard to argue with them. You cannot debate them into belief or into understanding the gospel. You certainly can reason with them, but it has to happen slowly and over time. If it is a family member, remember that you do have time on your side. It doesn't all have to happen in one conversation. Another practical way to witness to somebody is just through your example. Your own character, how you live out the gospel in your life. One of the things that I believed as a witness is that everybody who was not in the organization was blinded and somehow deeply unhappy, deeply unfulfilled. And when I realized that there were people who lived fulfilling lives and I saw true Christianity being demonstrated, it made me a lot more receptive to hearing the gospel.
So maybe part of it is just being able to have a close enough relationship where they can see that really in your life. And I think that's true for nearly everyone that we share the gospel with, that aspect is so important today. Because most of the time when you're talking, or I guess I should ask you this, when you're talking with someone that's Jehovah's Witness, it seems to me that oftentimes they know, at least they know this scripture, they know it pretty well. And I don't know if it's just that they know particular spots really well in it, but oftentimes they have, how would you engage with someone that is really coming back with you with, the scriptures? Like, is there any advice that you can give in that sense?
I would say you have to understand why they are trying to share their version or their faith with you. Is this happening from a point of tradition? Like my family does this and so this is what I do. Is this happening from emotion? I really, really actually truly care about this person and they're trying to share their faith with you. Or is this happening because of guilt? They're scared of retribution if they don't. And then if you can understand those couple of things, then you might be able to understand how to more effectively talk to them about, because if they are quote unquote wrapped up in the history of the organization, then you can dive into the fine details of the history. If they are emotionally attached to you, then you can say you can plead to the emotions of God. God is love, and how does the true gospel show itself with God's love?
Right. Well, this is some good advice, and I guess we're already over 30 minutes into this, so if we continue, we'll have to continue on another episode, I suppose.
Sounds good.
So thanks for sharing, and we're glad to have you here in Ukraine. So let me ask you a last question. What do you think about Odessa in Ukraine?
I love it. It's very beautiful. It's a beautiful city. I might be biased, but I do love the culture here. I think it's very interesting to see the different way that the church is global and how Christianity shows up in different cultures. It's something that I was not exposed to being from the States.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the podcast today, and thank you for listening. As always, if you have any questions, you can find our podcast at Gospel Today online, and appreciate your support. We're here continuing to minister to Ukrainians as well as to people from many other countries during the war here in Ukraine. So we appreciate your support that allows us to stay here, share the gospel, to give hope in a time that is very difficult for Ukraine.